fans and got inevitably burned by the sequel being different or failing to be as spectacular and new as its predecessor when it came out. Judging it as a game, I think it's really good.
Now, the opening 5 words to his statement here are what's important. The rest of that statement is dressing. Is Dark Souls 2 unfairly maligned? It is professed by many that the game is the weakest in the series and that it deviated from coherent design in a myriad of significant ways, and thus earned its reputation. However, if people are over-exaggerating the more corrosive elements of Dark Souls 2, and it has far more to offer than critics would have you believe, then yes, it would indeed be unfairly maligned. But how would you be able to prove whether that was the case? You would need to take established perspectives of those within the industry or the audience and prove them to be falsely or maliciously developed. Or you could prove them to be true and genuinely developed. And so Harris begins his video. The opening argument is about the healing system in Dark Souls 2, a system that has been criticized by many as something that ruins what sense of consistent flow and difficulty the space spent between bonfires occupies by providing an easy access to many forms of healing that are very effective in allowing you to travel the world with ease. Comparatively, it is said that Dark Souls 1 limits the player on their healing abilities, and this provides a very consistent understanding of your resources and what needed to be managed, ultimately causing an experience that forced players to think about every fight and position they took, as well as having them learn the land as they carved their way through. Harris establishes that the healing in these games will dictate the difficulty, considering it represents the amount of mistakes you can make before you will eventually be sent back to your checkpoint. He then says this.
The reason Souls games are difficult in the first place is because of the way damage works in the games. If everything was the same, but all attacks did a half or a quarter the damage they do, the game would be fundamentally different, less challenging, and less fun as a result.
So let's break this down. The Soulsborne series would indeed be fundamentally different if you were to double or halve the health of enemies, or double or halve the damage of enemies. There is no denying that. If you were to halve the health, then the game would definitely be less challenging, since the challenge is to rid the enemy of their health. I imagine 100% of viewers would agree with that statement. The problem here is that H-Bomb uses the term fun, as if that is quantifiable. Let's say there is a man named Jack who is relatively dreadful at video games but plays casually every once in a while for fun. He is compelled to play Dark Souls by his friend and so takes months and months of individual sessions to reach half of the Lord Souls, and then he has something come up in his life. Something significant that prevented him from playing on. If this man had the time, he would have eventually beaten the game. However, had every enemy been given half health, he would have completed the game already and enjoyed his time with the game far more. This is evident by the fact that once he had his own power level increased via leveling and upgrading, he decreased the difficulty of the overall game and was able to approach enemies with satisfaction for himself, where other more talented or skilled players will not have required these resources. I don't know if it needs to be said, but doubling the damage of your weapon or halving the health of all enemies is essentially the same thing. Point is, Jack did exist, albeit under a different name. I watched him stream his entire experience and I felt a little humbled in that Dark Souls really isn't a game that is for everyone once they get good. Some people just want to play on, no stops or setbacks. They don't want to be punished and held back, which is not an insult to Dark Souls, but it is why people still talk about whether or not it should have an easy mode. Many games require a form of study or attention and time, not the least of which would be games like Civilization, Dwarf Fortress, StarCraft, Oxygen Not Included, Factorio, The Binding of Isaac, and Crusader Kings, to mention a few different genres. This is something many people around the world want: mechanical depth, extended periods of time devoted to a system, and viewing your own improvements as time passes, mastering what appeared to be quite the feat. The reason I need to establish this is the two words here: less fun. Considering there are people who are on the opposite end of the scale, the people who prefer a simplistic game with little in terms of punishment. Hell, there are people who seem to enjoy drilling into their own heads, or a masochist for general terms. It would seem that something being less fun is almost impossible in a general sense. There would have to be a special circumstance. For example, if you want to share that it is your own feeling, that is absolutely fine. But here, it is inaccurate. Since if the game did halve the health of all enemies, Jack would have had much more fun while playing, while people like me and perhaps you, Harris, would have wondered why the game was so easy and thus had less fun. Hell, what if Dark Souls had double the health of all enemies from the get-go, or a hard mode? I imagine Harris would be against that concept, but what if we lived in a world where that was normal? Can you honestly say how much fun is brought from it? The reason I have tackled this thoroughly is that we're going to see a pattern in Harris's work. He will often make a strong premise based on factual and presented evidence, but then he follows that by a weak conclusion. Additionally, he will shoehorn in the term fun as if it is accurate when it simply is not, nor is it helpful to the conversation. But the problem here is the constant need to prove that Dark Souls 2 is indeed better than Dark Souls 1. So already he needs to start manipulating the language, because if something is more or less challenging objectively, it doesn't mean it's more fun. It doesn't even mean it's better designed. However, if something is more or less fun objectively, he may as well be saying it is better, and that is far more satisfying to get out in the conversation whether or not it's accurate. However, he hasn't tipped his hand yet, so let's wait for that.
Souls games have no difficulty setting because there's almost no way to make the game easier without fundamentally altering the thing that makes the games fun.
In this scenario, the thing that makes the games fun, according to his previous statement, is the amount of health the enemies currently have. If we change that in any way, we will change the amount of fun according to this. What is interesting here is that I agree with him completely, but for different reasons. Changing how much health enemies have would change how much fun the game is. Yes, it would make it far more fun, or much more fun, or a little bit better, or mostly the same, or worse, or a lot worse, or terrible. It would change based on how much they changed it, who's playing the game, and how much time they've spent with the game. As much as I appreciate the work created by From Software, I seriously doubt that anyone, including their own team, think that the amount of health every single enemy has in the game is at its best amount it could be to mediate difficulty and create the most fun. That's not even something that anyone could know anyway. Harris then talks about how the healing abilities of your character will fundamentally alter how you approach the game. Bloodborne healing is about being immediate and fast, while Dark Souls healing is about being careful and finding windows to use it. Interestingly, he says the developer controlling the items in relation to health and their values would have a strong influence on how the games are played, and is more important, in a sense, than any of the others on the team. Which is actually very true in its own way. He then says healing in Demon Souls was often something that had to be given a lot of time and space, and generally became nerve-wracking in boss fights. This is also true. Healing is a risk/reward system, and it is in all of the Soulsborne series. But then he says something else.
There is something of a downside to this, however. Firstly, while it is very calculated and purposeful and challenging to heal, should it be? It's fair, but is it good to be in a situation where the most pressing thing, trying to heal, is a really bad idea that would itself kill you? A lot of early players die while mashing the heal button. That's not fun, even if simply not doing that is technically the sound response.
Should it be challenging to heal? It really depends on where you're arguing from. Are you asking from a standpoint of whether it is fun to heal in video games as a mechanic? Health bars are an established aspect of video games. The health bar represents your mistake allowance. In Dark Souls, it is also mediated in tandem with your armor and resistances. The reason we have healing items and mechanics is to restore our mistake allowance, but if healing were challengeless, then why not simply give us a health bar representative of the amount of health we would have if healing was added to the bar and remove healing altogether? Making healing difficult acts as the punishment for making the mistake in the first place and trying to essentially undo it. This moves to the second sentence, in which he declares that it is a fair system, but asks whether the system is good when healing is a bad idea that would itself kill you. This is a very weak way to structure your argument. Healing cannot be strictly considered a bad idea that would itself kill you. It is a deal you make with the item itself. A deal that you will receive the reward of reinstating your mistake allowance, and in exchange the item expects you to sacrifice seconds of your time and movement. To allot a free space of a select amount of seconds, you will need to understand your enemy and react to them. It is undeniable that if you take a hit during battle or evasion of an enemy in the game, then it is your fault. Perhaps not 100% of the time, but mostly, as this is what the Souls games are predicated upon. Ultimately, your health is your responsibility, and each of the games in the Soulsborne series make that clear. How difficult it is to heal is down to the player. The healing will only become something pressing if you take the hit in the first place. The most pressing thing in the battle is winning the battle, and subsequently the operations that come with that, including attacking, defending, moving, positioning, healing, and timing all of it. So not only is it